Sup guys, this is the Staff Sarge, and today we're talking about an old favorite of mine. This is from even before I got Jagged Alliance 2. Total Air War. It's probably the best of the F-22 simulators that's out there. See, back in the 90s, the F-22 Lightning II was the next big thing in aviation. So to capitalize on the publicity, everything made reference to it. Now it's 20 years later, we still have no bloody F-22s in the field, but we still do have this game. So, ignoring for the moment the absolute failure of the American military-industrial complex, Total Air War is a flight sim. It's focused on two airframes. First, the F-22, obviously, and the E-3 Century AWACS. Now, you don't actually fly the AWACS because that would be boring. Instead, you take on the duty of a controller. You order flights around, you intercept enemies, scrambling, intercept flights, all that kind of stuff. Personally, I don't find this all that much fun. I mean, you play this game to fly fighters, but still, it's fairly smooth and it's required entry into any campaign. The thing with the campaigns in this game is that if you start off with 0 experience, you're level 1. AWACS have no level limit, so you can go into them anytime. Combat Air Patrol is 1 or 2, so you might be able to fly a couple of them in safe zones. Actual combat operations, on the other hand, Interdiction, Seed, those are level 3 and up, and the more risky they are, the higher the level you need. So you generally start off flying a few patrols and doing AWACS duty just to build up the experience in order to get into these higher level missions. The good news, once you finish a campaign, it will actually up your global experience. So next time you start one, you might be on level 2 or 3, which is really handy. Anyway, onto the meat of the game itself, the F-22. That's your only choice of fighter aircraft. There's a wide array of enemy fighters, AI fighters, but you're only going to be using the 22. Good news is, lots of weapons you can choose from, and damn near every single mission. You'll be dropping bridges with paveways, sinking merchants with harpoons, taking on sand batteries with Harm and Maverick, and of course taking down enemy fighters with AMRAAMs and Sidewinders. This was from the time when the 22 was expected to do everything, the ultimate multi-role fighter, capable of infiltrating enemy airspace, dropping some iron on a specific target, and then taking over local air supremacy to cover dedicated strike craft. The game does let you turn into a proper mud mover, what with wing mounts that can carry about a dozen heavy iron bombs. So you can hit with the same force as a Rhino or Thud, but you're a hell of a lot slower and less maneuverable. You're also not stealthy. RCS goes straight to hell. If you stick with an internal stealth loadout, you won't have as much to play with, but you'll be able to evade enemy radar much more easily. Now, one feature that all flight sims have, and Total Air War is no exception, are the tutorials. It's got a lot of tutorials covering almost every function there is. It's basic flight, emergency landings, combat procedures, weapon use, ground and air, and a dogfight school against another 22 or a pair of flankers, or even flights of 4 against yourself, just with cannon or Sidewinder. Now for new players, this is a must. You just have to make sure to read the description before you start, because there's no tooltips or hints given during a tutorial mission. There's also a skirmish option for extra practice. You can pick any weapons and go against any hostiles. Really useful for combat practice and evasion tactics, especially if you decide to go up against, say, a dozen SA-11 SAMs. Those are in the campaigns a lot. They're very common and they will mess you up in a damn hurry. Actually flying and fighting with the 22 does take a bit of getting used to, hence the tutorials. You got your weapon controls, radio procedures, allies and wingmen, the various tactical displays on the MFDs, defense, attack, navigation, diagnostic, IRST, all that kind of stuff. It's all based very closely on the real F-22. Now you've also got MCON, which is a mission control. You need to use this to evade the enemy. It's very important to get it down packed. You put it on MCON 1, you got everything running. Full radar array, all countermeasures, all weapons. MCON 5 means everything is off. You got no radar, no jammer, no fire control. You can still use the IRST for Sidewinders and dumbfire weapons, but that's it. It's important to go to MCON 1 if you want to remain stealthy. Now the F-22 itself does have a slightly strange flight model in my opinion. I mean, if you've got a clean profile, you can supercruise no problem and turn on a dime. It's a very capable fighter. You put anything on the wings though, it goes straight to hell. You're basically just in a flying brick. The power to weight ratio is also not what you'd expect. Against foxhounds and flankers, it just doesn't seem to have that much power. So in a brawl, they're a little bit harder to take on. The good news though, they did add a toggle for thrust vectoring, so you can turn that on and off whenever you like. What it does is it makes you pull insanely hard turns. It also makes you stall out insanely quickly, so you need to be very, very gentle if you decide to use thrust vectoring. But it can turn a dogfight into your favor in a hurry. Onto the campaign themselves. These aren't just a bunch of missions that are strung together. Instead, you've got a dynamic campaign taking place in and around the Red Sea. Each campaign will have a US ally who you're fighting for, an enemy state supported by the French or the Chinese generally, and all the other nations will be neutral. Now there will be a set goal. For example, your side may be moving to stop nuclear weapons production, so your objective will be to strike enemy industrial complexes, while the enemy may concentrate on halting the air war by hitting your airfields. The goal is to try and cripple a certain percentage of the enemy's infrastructure. It could be industrial, naval, army, whatever it is, while at the same time reducing damage from the enemy. Oh, and there's also a time limit. When the time limit is reached, that's when your higher-ups decide that the air war isn't going exactly to plan, and so they'll either change strategy, in which case you'll need to shift target, start hitting something else, or they'll just declare a ceasefire. The idea behind this is to try and show how wars are really fought. It's about two sides picking their goals and then going towards them. The problem is, because they often have conflicting goals, they end up having to react to each other and the plan goes straight to hell. It eventually just becomes an all-out brawl, randomly hitting each other until finally one side falters. So, the question now is, how exactly do you get your hands on Total Air War? Well, you can't really get your hands on the original. It's a pretty hard game to find. But the good news is, the interwebs have once again come to the rescue and they've actually rebuilt it. Total Air War 2.5 is the free-to-download updated version. It has full support for Windows 7, a bunch of tweaks to the engine that make sure it works correctly. It even has the missions and campaigns from the other DID F-22 games. If you're even mildly interested in playing a flight sim, I recommend you get this. It's free, it's good fun, the learning curve isn't too bad. This is a game I honestly do recommend it to everyone. Even if you don't have a joystick, you can still use the keyboard controls. Plus, if you plan your approach correctly, you honestly won't need fancy flying. A good fighter pilot is an assassin first and a dogfighter second. And in a world with low RCS fighter aircraft, that's more true than ever. Staff Sarge out.